And as you say, it's the momentum, it's the trend that seems to be moving
Yes.
in the wrong direction. And part of that trend, as we start to see lack of faith in America, in the American dream, in American military might, is this trend of de-dollarization, which I'm assuming you have firsthand experience with. I mean, we know countries like the BRICS are opting to trade in their own currencies, moving away from the dollar. Countries are holding less dollar-backed reserved assets. According to the latest IMF data, the US dollar accounted for 59% of global allocated foreign reserves in the third quarter of 2023. That's quite a significant drop from several years ago. So what are your thoughts on the dollar being dethroned as king of reserve currencies, having this global perspective that you do?
Well, I think one of your guests said it'll happen in his lifetime, and he's a little bit older than I am. I think dethroned sounds very violent. I think things happen to the margins, and every year you see a percent here, a percent there. I think it was in the low to mid 70s at the turn of the century. So now you're down to 59. I think at one point it was even a little bit lower than that. That's what happens at the margins. I mean, marginal changes drive big results. And what does that lead to? The U.S. uses that dollar reserve position to do a lot of things. Number one, to go and bully countries to impose sanctions. You saw in the Russia-Ukraine war, they wanted to look at secondary sanctions. If you buy Russian oil, if you do whatever else, you're going to get sanctioned. They realized it would backfire. Well, that had backfired 25 years ago. So I see that the kind of countries we're talking about. Now, I'm not saying that we're talking about Russia or China or some of these, countries that are in the oil business, but the kind of up and coming economies that I look at, that I invest in some cases that I have the ability to live in, I think they're emboldened. And they realize that the U.S. government has used this strong dollar to sanction almost 4 times as many countries and people as the turn of the century. I don't think there's 4 times as many bad guys. I think a country got drunk on power, got used to no competition. You think they're going to treat you, the citizen, any better than they treat everybody else around the world? They use the dollar as a weapon. And so what I think happens with de-dollarization is the less, dollar hegemony they have, the more they're going to be backed into a corner, the more they're going to have to come out and look to raise taxes, look to bring in money on things like crypto with taxes there, or people who aren't paying their taxes on crypto. They have to go after those people. They're going to go out and probably start some more conflicts. They're going to probably start more trade wars. They're going to increasingly get debt. They're the tiger backed into the corner. That's what I see de-dollarization. I think it's going to gradually happen over time. I think we talked about how maybe it gets down to somewhere in the 30s in the next 2 decades or so. That's kind of like the has-been business you went to back in the 80s or 90s, and they still exist, but it's like no one ever thinks about them. Whatever that business is where you are, you're kind of getting into that territory. And it's easy to sit in the United States and say, hey, this seems like the center of the world to us. Go to Asia, go to Singapore, ask the bankers in Singapore, as I did, where would you rather the money come from? They say, we have plenty of Indonesian clients. We have plenty of Indian clients. We have plenty of people from here in Singapore. We have plenty of Thai and Vietnamese. We don't want American money. We don't need it. We're conservative. We're some of the strongest banks in the world. The U.S. is hardly the center of the world to us. And I think that's the way the world is going. That's the consequence.
Well, if you're seeing the move away from the dollar as a gradual development, not something happening suddenly, and not necessarily bringing in other assets into the conversation like gold and Bitcoin, we'll get to that later. But from your experience, which fiat currency is gaining popularity, if there is one, or if there's a group of existing fiat currencies that seem to be more appealing in this new era?
Well, listen, I know that any fiat currency is super appealing. I like to be diversified. I think there's opportunities in that. Look at the Mexican peso. I was on CBS News not long ago talking about the peso's amazing rise. That speaks to what's changing in Mexico. If I were to give birth, or if I were with someone who gave birth to a child today, I would rather give birth physically in Mexico and have a Mexican citizen child, because I'm not an American, than I would to have, give birth in the United States and have an American child. I think that Mexico, with all of its problems, will be trending in the right direction more than the United States in the next 18 years. So the peso's done well. Look at some of the countries that we've talked about. The Georgian lari, the Armenian dram have benefited from migration due to the war. Those currencies have done incredibly well in the last 2 years. And if you look at stocks like Bank of Georgia, TBC, those look like incredible bargains on the stock market. I'm not giving anyone a tip, but if you look at PE ratios, if you look at dividend yields, if you look at all the performance of those banks, it outperforms any Western bank. So you're seeing in some of those emerging market countries, they've benefited from some of this stuff. Mexico is benefiting from some of the issues in China and a push to nearshoring. So those are some of the better ones. I like the Singapore dollar as a developed currency. I think that it's a very well-run country and currency. So, those are four that I would look at.
All right. Well, one of the tips that you give is on asset protection via geographic diversification. So not only diversifying the types of assets that you have, but where you should have them. Break that down for us.
I believe in having assets around the world. I have homes in 7 different places around the world. That's a form of lifestyle diversification. I can go and live there. I can see what's happening for my business. I can enjoy being in different cultures. I can pull the lever that if something bad is happening in one place and there's a lockdown or there's a problem or whatever, I can go somewhere else. I don't have to live in one place full time, which helps with tax planning. So I can, reduce my taxes if I need to. I also have places that are tax friendly that I wanted to go there to live full time, I could. But, that real estate helps me in many cases get residence permits or citizenships, which means I have more personal freedom. I'm more than a tourist when I go there. If something bad happens, they're generally going to let me in. I have a higher level status. Maybe I can invest in local markets once I get that citizenship where a foreigner can't. But it's a form of asset protection. People set up these offshore trusts and they put their U.S. real estate in it. Well, if you're going to get in trouble in the United States, the judge, and I've seen this happen, they're just going to say, hey, great, the real estate's here. We'll take that. Thank you very much. We don't care what some guy in the Isle of Man or the Cook Islands says. And obviously, I suggest people follow all the laws, but the governments get heavy-handed. We've seen Western countries come in and confiscate people's assets, including the United States in some cases, including people who are perfectly innocent, just got swept up in something. So I want to have bank accounts in other countries that might have access to money in case someone pushes the wrong button. It happened to me before. I paid my taxes. They limited my account. I had to fight them for months to get the money I already had paid them and have proof of paying them back. They don't care. Didn't bother them. I was without my money. And so I think, you want to look at not just having a holding company offshore or a trust offshore. You want to make sure you have a property you can live in with passports to go there, or residence permits, bank accounts. If you hold gold, consider putting some either in your house overseas or in a safe deposit box or in a foreign vault overseas. And if you have Bitcoin or crypto, maybe you put a physical ledger in a box somewhere overseas. I want to have assets where they're fully diversified, not just the structure is diversified.
All right, well, let's talk about the structure, though, because you mentioned gold and Bitcoin. Let's start off with gold, because we talked about the demise of the dollar, the demise of fiat currencies at large, and we have central banks buying gold at record levels, gold just hitting a new all-time high. Another record high this week with June futures rising above 2,300 an ounce, up around 11.7% year to date. Gold is seen traditionally as a safe haven. What are your views on gold as a safe haven, as a store of value, as an asset for the nomad capitalist, for the global citizen?
It's part of my portfolio. I'm not all in on anything. I mean, one of my big philosophies is you want to take a couple percentage points of your net worth and you want to buy some insurance the way you would for your house burning down or your car crashing or whatever. Insurance for me is residence permits, citizenships, asset protection structures like trusts. I mean, that's what makes sure the rest of the stuff is kept safe. I think people don't realize that until it's too late. Entrepreneurs don't realize it until they get too big and they start having problems. Every business does. Investors, everybody else thinks, it'll never happen to me, and then it does. You want to take some of the money off the table to do that. I think gold's a nice part of the equation. You can borrow against it in some of these places offshore, as I suppose you could in the U.S. I don't borrow, but I let it sit there. So it doesn't yield anything. It's done very well in the last couple months, and it's done very well, since I bought it. But to me, that's protection. It's something that's not, digitized, and I let it sit there in a private vault in places around the world that I believe are safe, so that I'm fully diversified. And whenever I want to go and grab it, I can. And in some cases, I have. So that's my philosophy on it. I'm not all in on gold. I'm not all in on Bitcoin. I think you want to be extremely diversified because there's any number of risks that each different asset class hedges against.
All right, well, let's talk about Bitcoin, because that is seen as the asset that appeals to many global citizens, given that it's seen as digital gold. It has many of the same factors Bitcoiners would argue, except that it also has the ease of transportability. Bitcoin also hitting a record high earlier of over $73,000, up over 56% year to date. So good performance there. Yeah. I know you have some big Bitcoin experts at the upcoming event. What are your thoughts on Bitcoin then?
I'm bullish on Bitcoin. I like it. I like the premise. I think that we want to avoid getting too much stuck in our own press. The wider adoption gets in Bitcoin, the more average people are going to get into it. I remember my father and I were in the internet many, many years ago, the nascent days of the internet. And he said, listen, one day it's not going to be nearly as libertarian because the average person's going to get on and they're not libertarian. And he was correct. So you have this very libertarian Bitcoin. I got my first one for about $800 in 2014. I stupidly sold it. I got back in probably around $4,200 in 2017 and a bunch more thereafter. The more adoption you have, the more people are going to want it to work like a bank. The more people are going to want regulations. The average person wants to be regulated. What we're talking about does not apply in the average country. The culture has changed. The places that we talk about where people just say, hey, let them own their Bitcoin. But in Western countries, I think there's going to be a risk. And so I don't believe that, a senator in Wyoming is going to single-handedly stand up to the system and make sure that Bitcoin is ushered into the United States. I would have concerns being a U.S. citizen owning crypto assets because you've been locked out of certain markets. We've got people who've wanted to get second passports just to get more opportunities in those markets. I think there's going to be increasing regulation, not outright bans, but regulation. You're seeing that in the European Union. And I think they're going to go after it in tax. If you're not paying tax on your Bitcoin or your crypto when you're selling it, I think you're crazy. They're going to come for you. But overall, I'm bullish on it. I just think people should be concerned. It's not going to be some libertarian panacea forever.
So it's interesting that you're raising a point that many Bitcoin purists or Bitcoin maxis have, and that is with this widespread adoption and with it becoming part of the traditional financial system, with the likes of BlackRock launching their spot Bitcoin ETFs, with it becoming an institutional asset, it takes away from its decentralized and libertarian ethos, which is a point of concern for many Bitcoiners. But in terms of how your clients see it, is it now an established asset? Is there still concern about government overreach, over regulation? Because you recently made a video discussing second passports to protect your Bitcoin. So what do you see coming there? Do you see regulation or excess taxation as a big risk to Bitcoin?
When I gave up my U.S. citizenship, I had a number of personal reasons that not everybody has. Obviously, not having to fill out so many forms is a nice thing, but it wasn't a key driver. What I said was, the mood is changing. I've wanted to renounce for some time. I feel that some of the conversations now I don't know what's going to happen, but something bad is going to happen. Now, I was proven right during the pandemic when people literally couldn't renounce, and there were people who owned Bitcoin, and it was going through the roof, and they're subject to an exit tax that they may not have had to been subject to. Had they been able to renounce promptly. So I just said, I think some bad things are going to happen. I think we're moving in the wrong direction. And I don't want to necessarily prognosticate about what that is. Again, it comes down to culture and it comes down to intent. I'm a citizen of, among other countries, St. Lucia. Obviously, if I go and live in St. Lucia, I'm going to follow the laws of St. Lucia. They actually do have personal income tax there. I could live in other countries nearby that with that passport that don't have income tax. But I don't think they're going to chase me around the world and tell me how to hold my Bitcoin. As long as I do things legally and ethically where I live, they're going to leave me alone. And I'm happy to do things legally and ethically. But, the U.S. to me, in countries like that, could be China as well, could be Australia, could be anything like that. They're going to want to be more heavy-handed. And I don't know what it's going to be. I don't think it's an outright ban. But you're seeing in the EU, restrictions on privacy and that kind of thing. Who knows what it could be? All I know is, including under Trump, laws came in where, hey, you know what? Let's go back a few decades and let's rewrite the rules. You can play by those rules now. That's scary when they can go back decades and say, hey, listen, we were just kind of joking. Can you, do what we didn't say? They'll do that again.
Right. I mean, people forget that there was a time in U.S. history when gold was banned, right? Yeah. So it's not beyond the realms of comprehension that those kind of regulation changes happen. And just because something is a certain way now, it doesn't mean it's going to stay that way. Andrew, we saw a lot of interest in Bitcoin, particularly after the bank crisis in March of last year. We had 3 of the largest U.S. bank collapses in history. And you've recently highlighted that American banks are still very much at risk, especially for those that have more than the FDIC insured amount. You looked at other banks globally as being safer. So give us a sense of how risky you think the US banking sector is at the moment? Because I believe you said that the top banks in the US are actually 60th in terms of safety on the global stage. Break that down for us.